Well, after that really lively music, it might seem a rather dark and dismal subject that I'm going to address, that about bee death. But I think it's one that touches all of us, and I hope to convince you that it does indeed touch all of us on this planet, and it's an important one that we ought to think about. And indeed, over the last 15 years, there have been ongoing reports in the science publications, but also in online fora and in newspapers of decline of bees and the consequences that might have. Now, for me, I think there are ethical and even aesthetic reasons why we ought to conserve bees. But from a purely utilitarian perspective, bees are important. They pollinate our crops and wild plants. Roughly 90% of wild plant species are pollinated by insects, mainly by bees. And, I don't know what you had for lunch today, but I've been eating some of these strawberries, local strawberries. Without pollination, we wouldn't have those. And that strong utilitarian argument is that roughly 10% of agricultural output is dependent directly or indirectly on pollination, insect pollination, usually by bees. We're all consuming bee products or products that arise through bee pollination. And therefore, we ought to be concerned about it. Now, bees are declining. There have been lots of reports of bees declining. Why is that the case? Well, there are multiple explanations, multiple causes for decline, and many argue that interrelated factors could be causing the decline. I'm going to suggest to you today that for wild bees, it's land use intensification, which is problem number one. And for honeybees, major problem is that of pathogens. So, now starts the biology lesson. Bees are, I think they're beautiful, but certainly they are diverse in size and color. We have some 20,000 bee species in the world. In Saxon-Anhalt, where we are at the moment in this state, there used to be 418 species. In the last 25 years, we've lost about 15% of those, and many others have become very rare. So we're actually losing biodiversity, maybe as I speak. We are losing species. It's very difficult, though, to quantify whether population sizes are decreasing or not. And therefore, we have taken a different approach, one in which, rather than looking at the bees themselves, we said, let's look at the pollination service that they provide. And in this case, I'm going to tell you about a study across Halle and its environment. We've analyzed or quantified that ecosystem service of pollination at these white dots, multiple sites. Here we are in Halle in the city centre, and that's one of our sites, and you can see in red are the urban areas, in yellow the agricultural areas. So we have a suite of sites varying from very agricultural through to rather urban. And then to quantify pollination, we're scientists, so we've run an experiment, a highly controlled experiment to quantify pollination, in which we've grown in an insect-proof glasshouse 4 different local wild plants. So they've had no insects visiting them. Their seed production is entirely dependent upon insect visitation. And then those plants, or several individuals of each plant, we've taken to a site, left it there for 5 days, brought them back to the glasshouse, and waited to see what seed is set. And in that way, across all those sites, we can quantify quite well service provision of pollination. Some have got long corollas, some have got short and open corollas, little tubes for nectar. So we're attracting a range of different bee species with them. What do the results look like? Well, it was one of those eureka moments when the data were shown to me by Panos, the PhD student who was involved in the project. Goodness me, going from left to right, agricultural to urban, we've got on the y-axis here, seed production. And although you don't need to see the individual data points, for all 4 plant species, you can see consistently there's more seeds set in the city than there is out in the countryside. And I was absolutely staggered when I saw those data. What they tell us is that out in the countryside, it ain't very good for pollinators. And in the city, they still seem to be doing okay. Now, I will suggest to you the cause of the decline of wild pollinators is therefore related to what we're doing out in the countryside. The intensification of land use in all its facets. Pesticide use, intensive ploughing, no wild strips of flowers anymore, and loss of hedges and woodlots that are all probably part of that intensification of land use. You know, it's ironic actually, isn't it? Because it's out in the countryside where in Germany we produce our apples, and in Greece the almonds are produced. These strawberries aren't grown in a city, they're grown out in the countryside. And it's out in the countryside where we're lacking pollinators. So what do? We introduce honeybees. And honeybees are commercially available. They are somewhat domesticated livestock. The honeybee, single species, is used now extensively across the world for pollination of crops. And beekeepers keep bees partly because they earn money from pollination contracts. Indeed, it's been suggested that it has been suggested, even if the image is gone, that the honeybee is the 3rd most important domestic animal after the pig and before the chicken, just in strictly economic terms, in terms of what it does for pollination. Now, you might say to me, oh, okay, great, so we've got honeybees. What's happened to the world population of honeybees? And this is FAO statistics show over the last 50 years, the world population of honeybees has increased. It's almost exponentially. And that's because we've become richer. The world has become richer. We like and enjoy to eat fruits, nuts, and seeds that have lots of minerals and vitamins that taste nice, and these are often insect-pollinated. So agriculture has become more insect-pollinator dependent, and therefore beekeepers have followed suit. There's more beekeepers that keep honeybees in the world. So if there's any reporters in the audience, please, before you phone me up next time and tell me the world is about to lose honeybees, take a look at FAO statistics. We've increased the number of honeybees across the world. So that's across the world. That belies a pattern, which is more subtle than that. In these countries in green, we have seen an increase in the number of honeybees. In the countries in brown, which is basically northern temperate countries, the numbers of honeybee colonies has decreased somewhat. But the main problem that any beekeeper will tell you is that over the last 15 to 20 to 30 years, it's not easy to keep honeybees anymore and to maintain the numbers. And it was highlighted particularly in 2006, 2007 in the USA, when one beekeeper in Pennsylvania, followed by many others in the US, noted his colonies, honeybee colonies, went into winter looking like this, and they came out in spring looking like that. And we often have that problem in our colonies here in Halle. They all die suddenly. And this, I will argue, is likely caused by a parasitic mite, exotic parasitic Varroa mite, and the viruses in particular that it transmits, and that cause bees to look like this, manky and deformed, not able to fly. And I will suggest that for honeybees, this is problem number 1. The Varroa mites, but particularly the viruses that it's transmitting. Now, I'm an animal ecologist. I'm well aware that parasites often regulate animal numbers. In the end of the 19th century, cattle were brought from India across to Africa carrying with them rinderpest virus. They didn't know that at the time. It hit Africa, and almost all cattle were wiped out, and a lot of wild animals as a consequence. We humans are not immune to the impact of pathogens. In the Middle Ages, the plague came to Europe, brought in by Italian sailors that had been in the Crimea. They brought with them black rats, that brought with them fleas, that brought with them the bacterium that causes the plague, that kills a human within 3 or 4 days. It spread within 10 years throughout Europe and killed roughly a third of human population. Okay, so back to honeybees. Varroa mites originally came from Southeast Asia, were brought by beekeepers across to Europe, and from there they've been spread around the world. Even New Zealand, with its tight restrictions, has Varroa mites. Has honeybees with Varroa mites. Only Australia is the significant landmass without Varroa mites, and I don't know for how long that will be the case. We asked, so the Varroa mites themselves may not kill the bees. We asked, well, what is it, the pathogens that are associated with Varroa mites that are killing bees? We've sampled several hundred honeybee colonies from locations in red dots around the world where there are honeybees with Varroa mites, and in green dots, paired sites where there are still honeybees without Varroa mites. Whether that's still true today, I don't know, because eventually they'll get Varroa mites. But these locations were without Varroa mites, and then we screened for 14 different viruses, what are thought to be the common viruses, and one virus popped up consistently, deformed wing virus, that was far more prevalent where the Varroa mites were present in the honeybees, and also had a higher titer. The intensity of infection was higher for this virus where there was Varroa mites present than where it was not present, whereas that was not the case for those other viruses, the other viruses that we examined. And it points to deformed wing virus, which causes deformed wings in bees as well, as number one problem for the honeybees across the world. Now, we've done a variety of experiments in which we've tested different pathogens on honeybees. And again, I'm a scientist, so I use experiments to use highly controlled experiments where we either infect bees with a control solution or we infect them with a virus or with a microsporidium, a fungus or something else. In this case, we compared 2 genotypes, variants of deformed wing virus, an old one that's been around for some time, deformed wing virus A, and a new genotype that was first described in 2004, deformed wing virus B, which seems to have spread quite widely. And here's some results that you see from just this experiment. Here you can see the survival of the bees in the cages. And to go back again, we keep the bees in these little cages after infecting them, and then record how quickly they die. And you can see on the left at day 0, all the bees are still alive. 1.0. By day 40, control bees have died. That's normally how long it takes for a bee to how long they live in a cage. When we inject them with deformed wing virus A, they're all dead by day 20. Boom. When we inject them with deformed wing virus B, they die even quicker. Before day 18, they're all dead. Significant difference. So we've here got a virus which is very virulent. It kills the bees relatively rapidly. I mean, I think you would say something about it if you live for 40 years instead of 80 years. It really is a significant impact. And we've got a new variant that has arisen that causes even quicker mortality, that's even more virulent. And when we introduce these data into a mathematical model of colony, a colony model describing the colony dynamics of honeybees, we see after 4 years with this one viral variant, the colony is dead. After 3 years with this other variant, they're dead, even quicker. And that means if beekeepers don't treat their colonies, they're dead. We won't have any honeybees left. So beekeepers have to constantly keep treating colonies to control Varroa mites to keep the virus down. So they can do that at the moment, but they're just about keeping up with the impact of the Varroa mites and the virus. So that's honeybees and virus. We asked, well, are these viruses just restricted to honeybees? We therefore sampled across the UK at 26 sites, honeybees and wild bees from exactly the same sites, and screened them for virus. And what did we find? Deformed wing virus in particular was very prevalent in the honeybees, and this is a heat map showing the pattern of prevalence of deformed wing virus in honeybees. And the pattern of prevalence in bumblebees is statistically very similar to that in honeybees, suggesting there is pathogen sharing. So these viruses that are in the honeybee also seem to be getting into the bumblebees, and certainly they're pathogenic in bumblebees as well, and possibly other wild bees. What impact they're having on the populations of those bees, we don't know. So that's an open question that we're currently investigating. Nonetheless, viruses and honeybees, number one problem. Now, I want to finish by coming back to humans. In 2015, I read this interesting book, An Unnatural History of Emerging Infections by Barrett and Armelagos, two social epidemiologists from the USA. The book starts with a wonderful sentence, very thought-provoking. Microbes are the ultimate critics of modernity. Wow. Now, their argument is, we humans nowadays live at high density, often poor and undernourished in cities, and that is a breeding ground for virulent pathogens to emerge and escape in the population. And how very prescient of them. They wrote in 2013, we should watch out because there are viruses, such as Ebola virus, that are likely to break out and cause great problems. I read it in 2015 as Ebola was breaking out in West Africa. How prescient indeed. And what about our honeybees nowadays? They are managed intensively at high density, often undernourished, which is a breeding ground for the emergence of new, more virulent pathogens. So, what's killing the bees? Well, I'll suggest it to you. For wild bees, the majority of species, it's intensification of land use in all its facets. For honeybees, it's more virulent pathogens, likely responsible or causal for number one problem, possibly also for wild bees playing a role. These are human problems, human-induced problems, and we've got it within us to resolve those problems. For example, for wild bees, we can ensure that our agriculture is more ecological, not so intensive, so we don't eliminate biodiversity at the same time as producing food. For honeybees, there are technologies such as RNA interference that can have a short-term solution to the viruses, and a long-term solution would be in breeding honeybees which are tolerant or even better resistant to the viruses. And I think it's beholden upon us to take hold of those solutions and enact them so that we can continue to enjoy eating strawberries, and so that our children and our children's children can keep this system, this natural system running and enjoying the fruits of the earth. Thank you.